Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome into my Week 8 start and sit analysis for the wide receiver position. We've seen some major injuries as of recent. We've had some major trades as of well. And the wide receiver position is really all over the place. This may be the most important week that we've really had to dissect the wide receiver position and what it will look like moving forward. And we can't waste any time either. We need to hop right into it. Minnesota and the LA Rams on Thursday Night Football could get us off to a solid start. We already know Justin Jefferson. He's locked in the lineup, top 6 play, super safe upside, but it's Jordan Addison that could see a little bit of his decrease in value this week. TJ Hockenson coming back absolutely could be stealing some of those targets for him. And we've seen Jalen Nailor on the field as wide receiver 3 quite a bit this season as well, and he hasn't done all that bad. So let's keep an eye on the next couple of weeks with Hockenson potentially playing this week and what that means for Jordan Addison moving forward. Cooper Kupp coming back could be a huge boost to fantasy owners that have needed him for the last few weeks. Minnesota's defense gives up the 3rd most receiving yards and 2nd most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. And we know if Cooper Kupp plays, he's going to see a large majority of the targets. Now, he's a medium risk still because re-injury, maybe being pulled off the field, not really giving him 100% of the snaps right now is not going to be something that they want to roll with, and they try to keep him healthy, especially since his name is popping up in trade details right now. But Tutu Atwell has seen a decent amount of volume as well while Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua have been out, so Tutu Atwell probably isn't the worst flex option that you could roll with. As long as these games continue to be high scoring, we should be just fine. AJ Brown has a touchdown in all 3 games that he's played this season. And since coming back from his injury, he has over 200 receiving yards in 2 games. We know he's the target leader in this offense, and he'll continue to have big games, even when the matchup isn't exactly what we would like. Devontae Smith, however, is coming off a game where he had 1 reception for -2 yards, and that really spells what Devontae Smith is. He's going to have some really big games for you. He's going to have weeks where he helps you win. He's going to have weeks where he helps you lose. That's where we try to figure out which weeks will he blow up in. And going up against Cincinnati, unfortunately, it's really hard to read their defense at times this season. They've been really, really good, and then they've looked bad other times. Maybe this week they'll look bad and Devontae Smith will have some upside. With the way Joe Burrow is playing, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both have top 12 potential every single week. Jamar Chase will continue to hold that upside. He's the big playmaker in this offense and can score from anywhere. However, T. Higgins is seeing the most consistent targets right now. That gives him a really nice solid floor and gives him that top 12 potential every single week because of his touchdown upside. The Baltimore Ravens have a great matchup this week going up against the Cleveland Browns secondary, who's currently allowing the 10th most receiving yards, 5th most fantasy points, and they're tied for the 3rd most receiving touchdowns allowed to wide receivers. But the biggest question mark this week is going to be more along the lines of how healthy is Zay Flowers. After having a little bit of an injury scare, it looks like he's going to end up being okay, but that doesn't mean that he may not be limited this week, or maybe there's a shot that if something flares up, he's not able to go against Cleveland. We'll keep an eye on that as the week goes on. But here's a crazy stat for you. Over the last 3 weeks, Rashad Bateman is the wide receiver 8 in fantasy football. A lot of that because of a 20-point week this past week, but nonetheless, he still has been pretty consistent. If there's no Zay Flowers this week, he should see some really nice targets. Even if Zay Flowers does end up playing, Rashad Bateman should be considered a potential flex option. Cleveland also has a solid matchup going up against Baltimore's secondary this week. But with Jameis Winston starting at quarterback, who are we actually going to trust at the wide receiver position? Somebody's going to end up having a decent week, but right now, not knowing who Winston may have that chemistry with is what's going to lead us to having a high risk potential for all of them. Cedric Tillman had 12 targets, 8 receptions, and 81 yards last week, but not all of that came with Jameis Winston. Elijah Moore was right behind him. He had 7 targets, 6 receptions, and 41 yards, but he hasn't really done a whole lot. And Jerry Jeudy has been downright disappointing all season long. So is he really going to be the guy? In fact, cameras caught him pouting a little bit on the bench at the end of that game this week. Is that going to affect anything? If you're looking to start one of these wide receivers this week, I wish you luck. Me personally, I don't want to. If you're going to take a stab at anybody, though, just throw a dart and hopefully it lands on the right person. Tennessee's going to look a little bit different at the wide receiver position now that they've traded DeAndre Hopkins. Calvin Ridley now moving into that number one wide receiver position. Tyler Boyd probably going to be that wide receiver too. And going up against Detroit's defense definitely gives you an opportunity to pick up quite a bit of yards. They have allowed the fourth most receiving yards to wide receivers this season, even including the fact that they've already had their bye. But they've only allowed 4 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers because when you get to the red zone, they're finding ways to get stops, hold you to field goals, and even cause turnovers. And with Mason Rudolph under center this week, it may not be the best chance for us to try and figure out which one of these guys will end up being wide receiver 1. Calvin Ridley has the biggest upside. He has the most big play potential and definitely could have a couple of big catches. Tyler Boyd, working out of the slot, could end up seeing a few more targets as Mason Rudolph looks to get the ball out rather quickly. The Lions are going to have a tough matchup against Tennessee's secondary this week. They're currently allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position. And now you're going to be without Jameson Williams, which definitely puts you in a bind because his field stretching ability is what has helped open everything else up. Amon-Ra St. Brown should end up being the most targeted player. But then after that, Tim Patrick and Khalif Raymond, they're going to see some targets as well. But neither of them are guys that I would really risk going up against the secondary. If they had a really easy matchup, then I would say, yeah, Tim Patrick definitely could be a guy that could see 5 or 6 targets this week, and maybe you could end up flexing him. But this matchup is just not good enough to go that route. Unfortunately, the Arizona passing game just isn't working out too well right now, and the stats show it, especially for Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, he had to leave one game early because of a concussion, but even that, since week 4, he hasn't been able to break 40 receiving yards. The targets continue to be there for him. He's averaging 6, 7, 8 targets per game. It's just not turning into much right now. Maybe it's the connection with Kyler Murray. Maybe Kyler Murray is off his game, or maybe he's on too many games. Black Ops 6 does come out this week. Whatever it may be, they need to get going. And until that happens, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be super risky, especially in matchups going up against Miami, who's allowing the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers. All indications is that Tua is ready to go this week. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, the entire offense, except the tight ends really, are going to see a massive boost because of this. And I'm so excited for it. Typically, Tyreek Hill is a guy that we can smash into all of our underdog lineups. Well, you know what? I don't care what his projection is this week. I'm so pumped for Tua to be back and for Tyreek Hill to hit his ceiling. Let's go ahead and toss him in there. Right now, his projection is set at 87.5 receiving yards. Let's go higher than that because this offense is definitely going to be ready to go. And you can't tell me with Tua being back on the field that he's not going to look to get Tyreek Hill going in the offense right away and have a big game to go with it. And if you want to play along with this pick'em or any of the other pick'ems that we're talking about in this episode, and you want an opportunity to win a signed, framed Jonathan Taylor jersey, then you need to join us over on Underdog. And it's super easy to do. Just download their app, sign up for a new account using code word headliners, make a deposit of at least $10. Then when you play in your first contest, you're going to be entered in for a chance to win that autographed framed jersey, but you've got some goodies to go along with it. You're going to get a deposit bonus of up to $1,000 and a super special pick'em this week that's almost guaranteed to hit. And joining us on Underdog right now is absolutely necessary for those degenerates out there that want to keep going on the football season, but unfortunately, their fantasy teams may not be looking all that great. You can draft new weekly lineups, you can play in weekly contests, and of course, do all these pick'ems with us. So if you have Tyreek Hill or you have Jalen Waddle, and Tua does in fact play this week, fire them both up. This offense should be good to go once again. The Jets ended up getting a full game last week with both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson on the field, along with Breece Hall and Aaron Rodgers. This offense is going to continue to grow chemistry over the next couple of weeks, but that's why Adams and Wilson are both going to be a medium risk for me, because I still want to see how this target share is going to end up playing out. Does Rodgers end up force-feeding Davante Adams at any point in time? Does Garrett Wilson keep up with him in terms of targets? Both of those outcomes absolutely could happen, but that's why why we just have to be a little vigilant on keeping an eye on it and making sure we don't get overexcited about any current numbers. Now, the New England Patriots allow the 6th most receiving yards to the wide receiver position, and last week they gave up some big plays to the Jacksonville Jags. We'll see what ends up working out this week, but both Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams should have some fantasy value and are definitely okay to be in your lineup. Well, unfortunately, Demario Douglas, I don't want to say screwed us over last week, but didn't help us at all. Apparently, he woke up Sunday morning feeling sick, got to the stadium, tried to give it a go, couldn't, came off the field, tried to come back later in the fourth quarter, couldn't, came back off the field, and unfortunately, that torched our fantasy day. Prior to him coming off the field, he did have a big drop that would have been a huge gain for him, but unfortunately, he ended up leaving us with very little points. With Drake May so far outside of last game, he definitely seems like he's going to be the main target outside of Hunter Henry. So hopefully they get back on the same page this week. But going up against the New York Jets defense is not going to be easy. The last time Atlanta and Tampa Bay got together, there was a whole lot of offense. And considering the fact that Tampa Bay allows the 6th most receiving yards to wide receivers right now, means that we could definitely see a really solid day from Drake London once again. And then Darnell Mooney, we haven't seen quite the fantasy upside that he had a few weeks ago, but in this matchup, he could get back to it. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a serious mess at wide receiver right now. Chris Godwin is done for the season. Mike Evans is done for the next few weeks. And Jalen McMillan seemed to be the guy that was going to step up and help fill that wide receiver 1 role. He saw 8 targets last week after Mike Evans ended up going out of that game. Is he going to be looked at quite a bit? Probably, but right now it feels like Rachaad White and Cade Otton are going to be the primary targets in this offense, and then Jalen McMillan really getting whatever is left over. But don't count out any of the other wide receivers yet. We just need to see who actually ends up seeing those targets and the snap percentage. When your offensive players are going up against the Jacksonville Jags defense, you play them. The Jacksonville secondary right now is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game, the 2nd most receiving yards, and they are tied for 2nd in most receiving touchdowns allowed to the wide receiver position. Jayden Reed is going to be the guy this week. He's the wide receiver 1 in this offense, the best big playability, but also the best opportunity for the largest target share. And over on Underdog, his current projection to me isn't high enough. He's listed at only 54.5 receiving yards. And honestly, the only way he doesn't hit that is if in the first half, Green Bay blows Jacksonville out and they don't even need to throw the ball in the second half. But if you're feeling like he could disappear in the second half because of the score, then maybe take a shot at his touchdown instead. But Dontavian Wicks and Romeo Doubs also have decent flex appeal this week. Wicks is a little bit more touchdown dependent for me, and for Doubs, I think he sees a few more targets than what Wicks does and maybe has a little bit of a safer floor. After the game that he had last week, I would love to list Brian Thomas Jr. as a low-risk start, but I can't quite do it just yet, especially in this matchup. Green Bay's defense has been super strong at times this season. And even last week, going up against the Houston Texans, they made CJ Stroud look really bad. That was his worst professional game up to this point. Green Bay's defense absolutely could do the same thing to Trevor Lawrence, and that would end up hurting Brian Thomas Jr. No, the big play potential is always there. The touchdown potential is always there, but that doesn't mean that this still won't be a risky play. Listen, if Anthony Richardson is only going to attempt 24, 25 passes per game, that's not good for these Indianapolis wide receivers. But what's even worse than that is only attempting 24 or 25 passes per game and only completing 10 of them. That is way worse. And when Anthony Richardson finally gets his stuff together and is a little bit more consistent, we can start talking about these wide receivers as better fantasy options. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that as of yet. We'll talk about Anthony Richardson more in the quarterback video. I don't think he's completely cooked yet, but this season definitely could end up being a struggle till the end. This matchup with Indianapolis is exactly what CJ Stroud needs to get back on track. Did not look good at all this last week, and Joe Mixon is going to run the ball very successfully against Indianapolis. No Nico Collins definitely hurts the offense, and you can see it, but Tank Dell needs to get things rolling a little bit more. It's not his fault. It's kind of the offense's fault at this point. They need to get him into the game plan. Stefon Diggs is going to continue to be a really nice, safe play because of all the targets that he gets. Tank Dell is right behind him with a little bit of a better ceiling, but not nearly as nice of a floor. Chris Olave is the only wide receiver that I'm going to list for the New Orleans Saints right now. And he hasn't even been cleared from the concussion protocol as of yet. So we'll keep monitoring that throughout the rest of the week, and hopefully he's able to make it back. But this Chargers defense is not going to be easy to go against. Right now, they're allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. Now, Derek Carr is slowly working his way back, and it was said earlier in the week that if he can't go, Spencer Rattler once again will be the starter. And Rattler's just not offering enough upside for us to really look at any of the other wide receivers. As Chris Olave's playing, I'll definitely roll with him as like a flex type play because I don't know if his ceiling gets you into those high-end wide receiver 2 areas. But Rattler should look his way more than enough if he's the starter and Olave ends up playing. New Orleans is another one of those defenses this year where they give up a lot of passing yards but don't really allow teams to finish in the red zone. Ladd McConkey is the wide receiver 1 on this team. He hasn't had a whole lot of upside this season, but he's not a bad floor play either, especially if you're in a PPR league. If you need to flex somebody this week that definitely you need points from, Ladd McConkey in this matchup may not be the worst case scenario. Keon Coleman had the biggest game for the Buffalo Bills last week, so you may be shocked to see that I have him as a high-risk play this week. To me personally, moving forward, he just has the highest risk because his floor to ceiling differential is a lot higher than the other guys. Khalil Shakir has the best floor in this offense, but his ceiling isn't nearly as high as Cooper or Coleman because he isn't going to see nearly the type of touchdown potential that those guys will. Amari Cooper is going to be right in the middle. He's going to have a floor that's maybe a little bit lower than what Shakir is and maybe a little bit lower than what Coleman is. And then Coleman's going to have a floor that is way lower than both of those guys, but his upside could definitely be bigger than both of them. Now, Coleman facing cornerback 2s the rest of the season is going to be really great for his development and his potential. And this obviously could change over the next couple of weeks. We'll continue to monitor it. You could really play all 3 of these guys right now and just keep your fingers crossed that all 3 of them hit. This isn't going to be the best matchup for the Seattle wide receivers, but with no DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett and Jackson Smith-Njigba definitely have some really nice floors with increased target potential this week. Tyler Lockett has more upside than what Jackson Smith-Njigba does, but JSN definitely has a really nice floor. In this matchup against Buffalo, nothing's going to come easy, but if Buffalo leads this game and gives Seattle negative game script, we already know Geno's going to throw the ball 35 or 40 times, and half of those targets could go to these 2 guys. For Carolina and Denver this week, I absolutely think this could be one of the worst losses that Carolina suffers all season long. And I have no interest, even with the potential negative game script, of starting either Deontay Johnson or Xavier Legette going up against a defense that allows the fewest fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. Go ahead and give me Legette and Deontay Johnson to be my Mando must-avoid wide receivers of the week. One thing to note, Patrick Surtain still has not been cleared for this game as of yet. We'll continue to monitor that, but even if he is cleared, it's not going to make anything easier on this team. I really don't want to chase targets. I don't want to chase negative game script. I don't want to chase Andy Dalton or any of these players this week. This is an awful matchup. And even though I love Mando, there is nothing that they're going to be able to do to help out the Carolina Panthers this week. But they definitely could help you all out with the busy holiday season coming up, and you're going to be on the go all the time. Mando is definitely going to be something that you want to keep with you. They've even got wipes that you can take and that you can put in your car, so if you need to get yourself cleaned up real quick, you can do so. And their clinically proven formula can eliminate odor for up to 72 hours. So head on over to Shop Mando. Use code word headliners. You're going to get $5 off of their starter pack. That's basically 40% off the price. Head on over there and get yours today and then start getting some holiday gifts for your friends and family as well. I mean, let's be quite frank here. Somebody from this wide receiver group for Denver is going to have a solid game this week, but there's no telling who it's going to be. Troy Franklin right now seems to kind of be the volume guy for the rest of the season. We know him and Bo Nix played together in college, and unfortunately, he was pretty bad to start the season. Troy Franklin has really needed to work his way into the lineup. But now that he's done that, he's seeing a decent amount of targets. So if you're looking for somebody with a safe floor, that may be Troy Franklin. If you're looking for someone with the most upside, that would be Courtland Sutton and his touchdown potential. And if you're wanting to play Devon Vell, well, you can try and give that a shot as well. I'm not nearly as excited about him as I am the other two potentially having a decent matchup, but he should still see a decent amount of targets. Hopefully we'll end up seeing DeAndre Hopkins debut as a Kansas City Chief this week against the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the Las Vegas Raiders pass defense looks a little bit better than what they are because you can run the ball so well against them. But when you take a look at what Kansas City does, they're still going to throw the ball and they're still going to throw it quite a bit. I really think DeAndre Hopkins can be fantasy viable this week as long as he plays. And hopefully Xavier Worthy can find a big play touchdown because if DeAndre Hopkins is on the field, that will take some of that pressure off Xavier Worthy and maybe he can find himself a big play or two to go along with it. If for some reason DeAndre Hopkins doesn't end up playing this week, Xavier Worthy becomes a high risk play for me because even though he may see a decent amount of volume, the big play potential won't be nearly as good with top cornerbacks and more people looking his way. No more Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers is banged up, their running back situation sucks, their quarterback situation sucks. Other than Brock Bowers, we are not trying to throw anybody from this team in our fantasy lineup this week. The wide receiver value this week for the Chicago Bears and their potential ceiling is really reliant on what Washington does. With no Jaden Daniels, can their offense keep up with the Chicago Bears offense and try to break through that strong defense? Can Washington's defense shut down a Chicago Bears offense that has looked really good as of recent? I believe DJ Moore is going to have a solid day no matter what, but Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze reaching their ceiling is going to be really dependent on if this can remain a neutral game script for Chicago for a majority of the game. If they get out ahead and we see a large positive game script, then that's going to really hurt the upside for those two guys. And right now, DJ Moore's projection over on Underdog is only 59.5 yards. And I really feel like he can hit that line this week. So I feel like that projection should be higher. Even with Marcus Mariota last week, Terry McLaurin still had an overall super solid fantasy day. He caught all 6 of his targets for 98 yards. This defensive matchup is way tougher, so he's not going to be a low-risk start this week. But as long as he's the number one target in this offense, he could still have a decent floor. It's going to be pivotal for the Dallas Cowboys to bounce back this week against the San Francisco 49ers. And I know that's easier said than done, but you got smacked a couple of weeks ago by the Detroit Lions on your home field in front of Jerry on his birthday. You can't have that happen as the Dallas Cowboys. So can you bounce back this week? There seems to be a lot of tension on the sideline between CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. It really hasn't affected CeeDee Lamb up to this point, but unfortunately, no one really around him has been able to establish consistent fantasy value. It should be Jalen Tolbert, and maybe he'll see himself with some consistent value in this game here. But it really depends on what Dak Prescott shows up. Before we make too many definitive answers about the San Francisco 49ers, I think we need to see what's going to happen with Deebo Samuel. We know Brandon Ayuk is going to be gone, so that automatically bumps Jauan Jennings up to being a potential flex option. But if we don't have any Deebo Samuel either, now Jauan Jennings definitely becomes a guy that's going to see more than enough targets this week. He wouldn't be quite a low-risk start for me, but if there's no Deebo Samuel, George Kittle is really only the other guy in this offense who would get targets. So we'll continue to keep an eye on it. If Deebo Samuel is as sick as he was in the hospital with fluid in his lungs, I really am not 100% sure that he'll be able to play this week. Daniel Jones getting benched last week against Philadelphia, not ideal. And moving forward into a tougher matchup on defense with the Pittsburgh Steelers, definitely isn't ideal either. Now, when you take a look at the potential for these wide receivers this week, we go in a couple of different directions. Malik Neighbors definitely is going to see the most targets. That's just how it's going to be in this offense. But his ceiling is really dependent on the quality of those targets. If this Pittsburgh defense is consistently in the backfield hanging on top of Daniel Jones, Malik Neighbors doesn't have nearly as much upside because unfortunately those targets are not going to be that great. And trying to throw the ball down the field won't be as easy either. Now, Wan'Dale Robinson never has a high ceiling, but he's the guy that Daniel Jones looks to get the ball out fast. And Wan'Dale Robinson isn't breaking any big plays, but if you give him 8 targets a game, he's going to give you 70 receiving yards. He's going to catch 7 or 8 of those targets. And in a PPR league, he's definitely got really solid upside. In a half PPR league, he's got a really solid floor. I love that George Pickens had a big week last week, and I definitely was not on board with it happening, especially in my start and sit video when I talked about, hey, is Russell Wilson going to be the guy? Is it going to be Justin Fields? What are we looking at? Does Russell Wilson get replaced? And to begin the game, things were not looking good either. George Pickens really made his day on a couple of big circus catches, but he still had 9 targets. He caught 5 of them for 111 yards and a touchdown. And if we're going to get those stat lines more consistently with Russell Wilson at quarterback, I would be all over it. Love George Pickens, love to see him succeed, and hopefully Russell Wilson, if they truly do plan on sticking with him, can give him this type of upside every week. Yo, Headliner Nation, there you have it, my start and sit analysis for week 8 at the wide receiver position. A lot of guys are changing places, and we've had a lot of injuries this week, so hopefully this video has helped you get your lineup ready. Hit the like button, subscribe if you are new here to the channel, and turn those bell notifications on so anytime we drop new content, you'll know about it right away. Stick right here with us. We see some people commenting that their records look fantastic right now. We see some people commenting, hey, I got off to a slow start, but I'm starting to turn it around. And just because you may only have 1 or 2 wins doesn't mean you're out of the playoff picture just yet. Let's snap a streak off here and let's get everybody into the playoffs so Headliner Nation can show off fantasy championships once again. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.